Hello everyone, my name is Pavel Duryagin. I work at Ka University of Venice, and today I'd like to talk about some experimental evidence I obtained on the factors affecting the choice of tune in Russian WH questions. So it has been shown for a number of languages that information-seeking WH questions often demonstrate prosodic variability within language. According to experimental evidence, the choice of tune can be caused by various factors. First of all, it often marks elements of information structure, such as different types of focus, givenness, and topic. Also, it has been shown that the apparent differences can be influenced by a number of pragmatic and paralinguistic factors, such as degrees of politeness and the expected answer. Then, speaker-specific effects and different methods of elicitation have been shown to play a role in the choice of tune. To my knowledge, no experimental research exploring the sources of similar variation in Russian has been done before. However, traditional descriptions of Russian prosody by Bryzgunova, Svetozarova, and Kadzasov identified the main tunes used in WH questions. Since all these scholars mostly worked within Bryzgunova's holistic model of Russian intonation, I briefly present this model on the right in this slide. Basically, Bryzgunova identified maximally 7 patterns, so-called intonational constructions, and 3 of them are traditionally considered to be used in WH questions, namely the second construction, steep fall associated with prominent syllable, the fourth construction, with low trough on the prominent syllable and high level postnuclear pitch, and the fifth construction, the hat pattern. So, existing literature on the distribution of tunes in Russian WH questions lists a number of factors that presumably play a role. Among them, again, elements of information structure, presence of other questions in preceding context, and various paralinguistic factors, such as emotions of the speaker and the relations between interlocutors. However, I'd like to point out that no experimental evidence was obtained on the account of these interactions. One consistently experimental approach to Russian WH questions was carried out by Igarashi, who compared Russian polar and special question tunes and analyzed them in terms of autosegmental metrical approach. However, in his research, Igarashi deliberately left aside the variation in WH questions and analyzed only the pattern with high fall on question word, the one that has been considered default by Bryzgunova. Besides the factors listed in the previous slide, there is one more that has not been mentioned explicitly in previous research on the topic. It is the role of phrase initial particle a is a rather frequent function word in Russian that has additive and contrastive meaning. Simplifying it a bit, we can say that its meaning is somewhere between conjunctions and but. So this word is mandatory in Russian elliptic questions that show no prosodic variability and always have the fall-rise pattern. And at the same time, can be optionally used phrase initially in all other question types, including WH questions, where it does not change the meaning of the question, but functions as a discourse connective, indicating the contrastive or additive relations between the question and the preceding context. My hypothesis, based on preliminary analysis of corpus data, was that the presence of A increased the likelihood of rise and fall tune in WH questions. So basically, my research aimed to run an exploratory study and first of all confirm in experimental conditions the variability of tunes in Russian WH questions. Then I plan to identify these variants and give their tentative autosegmental metrical interpretation in line with the existing analysis. And finally, I was going to test the hypothesis on the effect of 2 factors on the choice of tune: type of focus and the presence of phrase initial word a. I used a reading task in which I asked the participants to reenact in pairs with experimenter with me a set of short dialogues. Every target dialogue contained a WH question in the same position. I chose three different question words: where, when, and why. Each of them has final stress and only voiced consonants in the stressed syllable. You can see an example of a stimulus on the left in this slide. Here, the target question is, why didn't you call him? I also manipulated the focus type. Here, I present only the results for broad focus compared to contrastive focus on the verb. The context presented in this slide is an example of broad focus condition. Instead, on the right now, you can see a contrastive focus context. Here, on the right, the speaker has to mark prosodically focus on the verb call to communicate his intention to know why didn't they call their friend instead of texting. Also, every target stimulus was elicited with and without initial particle a. To avoid participants noticing this manipulation, we presented the slides in randomized order, with a large number of fillers. In total, 20 speakers of Standard Russian participated in the experiment. All 240 stimuli were labeled and analyzed in Prague. 8 of them were discarded due to occasional disfluencies. Here are the results. First, I will present very briefly the tunes that were tested in my data. Actually, even in this rather small sample, I found all the tunes outlined in previous research. So first, Bryzgunova's default pattern, the nuclear fall on the phrase initial question word and deaccentuation of the rest of the phrase, was not rare in broad focus condition.
Когда он приехал? Когда он приехал?
This finding was rather unexpected, considering the fact that some more recent descriptions criticized Bryzgunova's analysis of this tune as default and defined the tune as impatient or impolite question. However, our speakers who used this tune were definitely not expressing these emotions because it would be inappropriate in these contexts. Then, in contrastive focus condition, the same pattern but with the nuclear accent moved to the word in focus was very frequent. Here we have an example of a question in which the speaker marks prosodically contrastive focus on the verb by saying, I don't care where she lives, where does she work?
Где она работает? Где она работает?
I analyzed both these patterns using the interpretation of falling nuclear accent proposed by Igarashi. In longer stimuli, second pitch accent often appeared. Here we have two options. First, in both focus conditions, while the question word remains accented, a second downstepped fall can be realized on the phrase final word, like here.
А почему вы ему не позвонили? А почему вы ему не позвонили?
Another option is a hat pattern, which I analyze as a sequence of two pitch accents connected by high-level transition.
А почему вы ему не позвонили? А почему вы ему не позвонили?
On the other hand, one pattern with clearly distinguishable high-level tone following the last prominent syllable was rather frequent in the data. I mentioned this pattern earlier when I spoke about Russian elliptic questions. This pattern is well known in Russian tradition as Bryzgunova's fourth intonational construction, and it is characterized by high prenuclear accent and the low trough associated with the nuclear prominence. Then the low target is followed by high tone, which is aligned to the whole postnuclear sequence, and not just to the phrase final syllable.
А почему вы ему не позвонили? А почему вы ему не позвонили?
However, while the rising tune is clearly distinguishable in the data, it is not always easy to draw the line between different falling patterns. We know too little about prenuclear accents in Russian, So at times it is quite difficult, if not impossible, to categorize the following patterns without making arbitrary decisions. However, in the autosegmental interpretation proposed in the previous slides, all these falling patterns differ only in prenuclear accents, but all of them have the same combination of nuclear accents and edge tone. On the other hand, we have one rising tune with clearly distinguishable high edge tone. So I decided to model the choice of tune as a binary decision between the group of falling patterns and the singular rising pattern. To test the effect of experimental factors on the choice of tune, a logistic regression model was fitted, with tune category as a dependent variable, rising or falling, and focus conditions, particle presence, WH word as fixed effects, and the random intercept for the participant. So the model showed a significant effect of particle presence and broad focus, which both strongly increased the likelihood of rising tune being chosen. Rather unexpectedly, a significant effect of question word was found, but only for the stimuli with the word when, which was significantly more often realized with a falling tune. Now let me move to the discussion. My study aimed to verify in experimental conditions the claims about prosodic variability in Russian WH questions and to test the effects of two factors on the choice of tune. First, in accordance with previous descriptions, a variety of contours was elicited. On one hand, a group of tunes with falling nuclear accent can be identified in the sample. These tunes differ in presence and configuration of prenuclear accents, but in my point of view can be analyzed as having the same combination of nuclear accent and edge tone. On the other hand, a rising tonal configuration was found to be rather frequent. As we see from the data, the use of this tune is not restricted to a set of consecutive special questions. Due to the fact that the categorization of falling tunes is far from straightforward, I modeled the choice of tune as a binary decision. While in broad focus, the whole inventory of tunes is available to the speaker, contrastive focus strongly endorses the placement of falling nuclear accent on the word in focus. This finding conforms to traditional descriptions of focus marking in Russian intonation. On the other hand, the data shows that in identical contexts, the phrases containing phrase initial discourse connector "a" were significantly more often realized with the rising configuration. Further investigations are needed to understand better the nature of this correlation. The simplest explanation of this effect would be analogy from elliptic questions that require obligatory use of "a" and this rising tune. In the end, I would like to thank anonymous reviewers for their kind remarks. I am aware that my experiment has several limitations. First of all, I wasn't able to give clear account on the significant effect of one question word. While looking for possible explanations, I found that I cannot rule out the possible effect of lexical givenness of verb in this context. Second, it is clear that to present a complete picture of Russian WH questions, formal criteria for categorization of falling patterns have to be implemented, which in its turn requires better understanding of the phonetics and phonology of prenuclear prominence in Russian. Clearly, further investigations are needed in order to disentangle the prosodic variability of Russian WH questions. These studies should also take into account other potential sources of variation. This is the list of references and some resources I used to analyze the data. Thank you very much for watching my presentation. I'll be happy to discuss with you any ideas. If you have some, please contact me via Skype or email. Thank you.